I know everybody's got questions they want to ask tonight.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Right now is, I done just mentioned it. Right now, you should be going through your hive and checking for swarm cells. And now's the time to be making splits. A lot of people tell you, no, you don't want to do it, but sugar is a whole lot cheaper to put on the bees than it is buying packages of bees. And right now, hives are full of bees. And it's an opportunity. You should be going in them hives every 2 weeks. If you've got queen cells, make a minimal split. Put a queen cell, or if you have plastic where you can't cut it, just set the whole frame in there and just shake some extra bees in there. I've got hives right now that are 2 deeps and 2 supers on, and I'm going to make 25 splits off of them. I make 1 frame splits. All you have to do is have a queen cell or a mated queen. Either way, some people don't want to buy queens and risk, building up a hive, but the easiest thing is to put a mated queen in there with 1 frame, and when she gets out and starts to lay and starts to get that hive, acclimated, I go to 2 other hives and I'll pull a frame of hatching brood from 2 different hives, and I'll add it to that there, and then that nuke will start growing fast. And usually within about 10 days, you can put it into an 8-frame or a 10-frame box. That's the easiest way to build your numbers up. And right now, you should be treating them bees. If you're worried about with honey on, anything that's sealed, pull it off. Get those bees treated, because right now, those mites are on the increase, and they'll start to soar real high in the next month and a half. So get them treated. I know people got some questions about all these different things we're doing with our bees. And if you're having problems, now's the time to talk about them.
Okay, first up is Paul. Go ahead.
Talking about splits, I want to do some splits. I'm only going to be able to do my splits like 2 weeks from now. But I want to overwinter in 5-frame nukes. So I should have plenty of time for those to build up yet, right?
Right. I mean, everything is depending on you and what you're going to do. Ernest is up north there, and I know he's making splits in September, and he's gotten them through the winter. You got to make them, you got to split them, and you got to feed them. So it's up to you how you want to manage your stuff. But, I would rather take 1 hive and make 15, 20 splits, and if I lost half of them, I'm about 12 hives ahead of somebody else, So you got to play numbers if you want to get ahead in beekeeping. Because you never know. You could have a good, strong hive, and a mouse gets into it or something gets into it, and you lost a good investment there.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about pulling honey off too, I got quite a bit of supers on there full of honey, but I'm wondering, should I pull it all and rely on my fall flow to build up for the winter?
You should be able to build up on a fall flow. So if you're worried about it, I would run it into buckets. I would try to hold it up to a light, take all the light stuff and pull the light stuff first, and then work to your darker stuff, and then keep it separated, because if you decide to sell it, you get a little bit better price for it. But you can always feed honey back, and honey feeding back is a whole lot easier than buying packages.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking also of going into the brood chambers and pulling out a frame or 2 of honey out of there, just to make some room for them as well.
That's the smartest thing to do right now. Right now on my page, there's so many people saying that their queens ain't laying, but they send me a picture, and as soon as a bee hatches, they're backfilling it with honey. For some reason, the honey flow is running a lot longer this year than it is in the past years.
Well, I tell you, I'm in New York, and I truly believe the honey flow really kicked in only about 3 weeks ago here. Mm-hmm. I mean, because my hives were filling up like you wouldn't believe in the last 3 weeks.
Well, the main thing that you notice is if you don't have mites, you're going to gain a lot of weight fast. But if you have a lot of mites, I hear people all the time starting in June, they'll say, my hive is getting light and I'm feeding them and it's not growing. It's usually because the mites are taking over. Most people don't realize once the mites get so high, if the bees are hygienic, that larva gets to a certain point and they're pulling it out. So you've used nectar to feed it to that point, and then they're cleaning it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I think all in all, this is going to be a pretty good year.
Good. Good.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Don.
Okay.
Okay, next up is Pat. Go ahead.
Buddy, I went and got my dog because he got a
I
bath
thought you.
today. It looked really good. Did you think that was Leon? Is that what you said?
No, I think he was selling dogs tonight.
I have puppies again if anybody's looking for one. I wanted to talk a little bit about honey supers and that kind of thing, because it's sort of a management thing, and you have to figure out when your nectar flows are. You're probably having a second nectar flow and you just don't know what your timing is, because if you don't know and you can't find out a solid answer, call your local agricultural extension agent, and they should be able to get you information if you don't have a bee club. Bee clubs, sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they don't want to tell you because they act like it's secret information. They're afraid you'll know what they know, and so that's a pain too. But your ag agent is really exceptionally helpful most of the time, and if they don't know the answer, they will search it out and find it for you. But here where we live, we get early spring nectar. So when I open up my hives middle of March, I'm already planning when my supers are going on for my early spring nectar flow. And we get those on. I harvest that about the first week of June, and I put my supers right back on, because my next nectar flow is cotton, and I know that that's going to start pretty soon. And so I put the supers right back on, gives the bees a chance to, settle everything and clean it all up and reshape all the cells and all. And so then when cotton is done, I pull off all but one box per hive. And that third harvest is my fall nectar. And one of you, Paul, I think it was saying that he didn't trust the fall nectar flow. Everybody has one, even if you're in a residential area, because you've got goldenrod, ragweed, fall asters, dandelions, all kinds of weeds in the ditch banks and stuff, and your little border areas in between neighborhoods where they're letting trees grow on the side of interstates even now. There's nectar flow in the fall is there. So don't be hesitant or don't think it's not going to happen. And if all else fails, it's worth feeding them if you need to get them through the winter. And take notes, figure out when that nectar came in, so that next year okay, well, hers came in the second week of August, but mine doesn't start until the first week of September. Or up in New York, yours may start maybe the end of July because your winters start so much earlier. So that's where your ag agent would be able to help you figure out when your nectar flows are, because your bees may already be thinking that winter's coming because you have an early fall compared to us. My fall doesn't get here till October, and New York, you may have snow on the ground in October. So you really need to figure out, what's going on for your location. But you should be able to manage it. And I sell bees too. So I sell bees and I get 2 solid nectar harvests, plus the third harvest goes for the bees. So you just need to figure out, I'm not special or anything, I'm just saying you just need to figure out what's in your location, what the dates are, and watch other locations around you. If they have a bee club, watch their Facebook page. Maybe somebody will accidentally say, oh, I put on a honey super. That's a cue that maybe that's when nectar flow starts for you, or pretty close to it. Some of the bee clubs, ours is excellent. We have classes. We have every month somebody talks about what's going on in the bee yard. But I hear other people say that their bee club doesn't tell them anything. They don't
change bee clubs.
They don't have a bee club, or you go and they stand around, 2 or 3 guys stand in the corner and talk to each other, but they won't tell you nothing. They won't tell you, how to get started or anything. So each club is different. You can't guarantee that they're going to get answers, but the answers are out there. If there's lots of people, there's 15,000, or is it 25,000 now, Don? How many members on Fat Bee Man?
There's probably around 25 going on 26.
Yeah, so somebody on there has got to live near you that's been getting honey for the last couple of years. Ask on the Facebook page, where do you live and when do you put your honey supers on? you'll get a random assortment of dumb answers, but occasionally it hits for right where you are too.
Well, there ain't gonna be no dumb answers. You have to kind of sort through it. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody's gonna boast, it's like they go fishing, and they catch a 3-inch fish and then it's 9 feet long by the time that they tell you. But,
Yeah.
when you're doing your supers and stuff, everybody has a different way they're gonna do their honey. I personally, myself, I do not save honey supers from 1 year to the next. When I get my last honey off, I cut all that comb out. I start with fresh wax in my honey supers every single year. Now, I'll explain to you my thinking on it. If you're going to store those things to throw them on next year, because there's a lot of old beekeepers, they're going to tell you, them drawed out combs, that's like gold. But I would be the first one to contradict that, because if you have a brood chamber and you put a new piece of comb in there, go back in 2 days, I can almost guarantee you that's where the queen's at. Now they're telling you they like that new comb much better than they do the old comb. But getting back to storage of these honey supers, if you're going to keep them from one season to the next, you either have to put them on paramoth or you have to crisscross them and open stack them. And then you run the risk of mice getting in there, chewing them up, and if they pee on it, I mean, the bees are not willing to go back in there as easy. So bees are making wax all the time. That's my thoughts on it. And the second reason that I'm talking about making splits, old beekeepers know a lot more than a lot of these young beekeepers claim they know. And old beekeepers have learned that the summer solstice, that's when you make new queens. And those queens act like brand new queens in the spring. They'll outperform. So that's a little bit, of information that most people don't even want to tell you. Now's the time to make your queens and get those queens going. Now you can start them out in a 5-frame box. We do them in minis and we do them in 5-frame with 1 or 2 frames. And when the queen is laying and we see eggs for 4 or 5 days, we'll cage that queen and then we'll start a new hive. Now there's a lot of ways to start a hive. And I'm going to tell you what I do I get rid of the welfare in a beehive. And the welfare of the beehive is the young bees that's hatching. So I take and I get a queen that's mated and I put her between 2 frames and I pull a frame of brood from 3 different hives and I put it in the center and then I put new foundation. I go through 10 hives and I shake out 90% of the bees into that hive. And I put them in my same bee yard, no more than 50 foot away. Now, what do you think is happening? All the field bees go back to the parent hive. Now the welfare is gone, so that hive actually works harder and produces more honey. Now the hives that's got all them nurse bees in, you're going to have to put some honey on that or feed them one way or the other. But it's a way you can really top out those supers and make honey. Now, I don't know how many people ever thought about or even tried that method, but old beekeepers got lots of little tricks up their sleeves. You have to make your numbers now because you're going to lose a percentage during the winter. And even if you do 100% of everything correct, there's that unknown factor out there. You might have a bear getting there. You might have skunks. You might have vandalism, or you might have theft. So if you got 4 or 5 hives, you really never should have to buy bees again. And I've sold bees to 2 or 3 people this past week. And we talked about the very same thing. They want to get started in commercial beekeeping. If you got bees, there's no need to ever have to buy bees unless you're trying to improve your genetics or change the genes of your beekeeping up there. So you're bringing in better stock. But you can keep breeding from the same stock there for a long time. Now, I hope some other people got some good answers rather than me sit here and just bore everybody.
Paul's got a question for you. Go ahead,
Okay.
Paul.
Don, I also put on some Ross Rounds boxes,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a queen excluder on there, and those bees didn't go in there at all. So now I took the queen excluder off. So I want to see
If you're going measuring from your bottom board without a queen excluder, I would run a minimum of 30 inches. That way you're not going to get no brood up there. And you want a good, strong hive. Now,
Yeah.
you can put an 8-frame, or you could even use a 5-frame Ross round box and put it on a 10-frame box. Put your piece of plywood on each side. Bees will chimney up on you. A lot of times people that have a lot of 10-frame stuff, they'll cut a 2x4 in half and split the difference on each side of the box, and they can change a 10-frame and it'll go up like a chimney to an 8-frame. But you got to have populations on that Ross rounds.
Yeah, originally I wanted to do it on the, because I bought the E-plans from you,
Mm-hmm.
put them on the 5-frame nuke boxes, you know? And
Yeah.
I wanted to do it like that, but I didn't have time to build them, and then I just used the 10-frame boxes I had. So, but I want to see, I was surprised that there was not one bee in there.
It sounds like you didn't have enough population. You got to have a really strong population, and then they go through the queen excluder, but I'd like to run them without. But now you're going to hear tons of people out there say the fall honey flow, goldenrod, yeah, ain't no good. But let me tell you a little something about goldenrod. You take that goldenrod and you put it into a hive top feeder and put 2 Ross round supers on there, and they're going to draw out some beautiful stuff. And when they put it in Ross rounds, that's going from basically a nothing to $25 per pound, because we sell them for $12.50 a round, and we can't make them fast enough.
You really think though, if I'm putting those boxes on top of the brood nest, you think the queen will go up in there?
Remember I just said about 30 inches?
Yeah.
A good queen's going to go 1.5 boxes, 2 boxes deep. And if you got an exceptional one, they might go 3 deep. I'm not seeing it a lot. But you will run across queens every so often. They'll run 3 deeps high.
Yeah. Well,
But you know, the biggest thing I'm running across, people come in here all the time, and the first thing they say, I want to make honey, I want to make honey. And they go ahead and throw a queen excluder on there. You got to stop and think what you're doing. More bees make more honey. So by limiting that with that queen excluder, you got less bees, and you're also wearing those wings out, squeezing through there. And then eventually it starts getting full of propolis, gets nastied up. People don't take care of them queen excluders.
Yeah.
I will use them when I got new students to shake packages, because it's like an insurance policy. We run double deeps with a queen excluder and a honey super. And we have new students, we can smoke through the entrance, and then the bees will run up through there, and you don't even have to check for the queen. The only disadvantage that you run across there is we have students that want drones, and when you do that method, you lose your drones. The drones won't go through.
yeah.
But when we're shaking in South Georgia, we just open the brood chamber, find the queen, and set the frame with the queen on the outside, and we shake 3 or 4 frames off the brood chamber. That way you get your drones.
Yeah. Yeah, and getting back to Pat there with the with my honey supers and the fall flow. I mean, our fall flow will probably last up until the first week of October, because we get the sumac and we get the the rag with the goldenrod. But I was just, it's like you said, I got to get my timing right. Because I don't want to throw supers on and then they fill them only halfway. I mean, then I guess then I'll feed them sugar water so they fill it up.
It'd take you at least a couple of years. Figure 2 to 3 years to learn the flows, learn when to do things and when not to do things. Now, you can put supers on. A lot of new beekeepers, first-year beekeepers, I've seen them, as soon as they get 5 frames in the brood chamber on a 10-frame box, someone says the honey flow's on. They throw 3 supers on. And the bees are just not going to do anything. They're going to chew up the wax if there's no honey flow. So don't be impatient. Everything comes in time.
I'll tell you, you're right about that, because last year I put double wax on my plastic frames, and I went in there a week later. Those frames were bad. They took every bit of wax off of them and moved it somewhere else.
Yeah. They recycling.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Don.
Okay.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, it looks like Steve might have a question for you. Let me unmute you here.
He's still muted.
Yeah, I can't unmute you. Are you able to yourself?
You probably have to tell him how to unmute him.
At the top of your image, you should have an unmute that you can click.
On the computer. My wife's fixing it. Go
There we
ahead.
go. Now we can hear you.
We can hear you.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
Okay, I've learned more just listening than asking. But well, 2 weeks ago, I had the medium that filled up on me, I put the 10-inch on top, and it's doing well. Everybody's saying it got honey bound, and so I have just a ton of frames with honey. So I put those on top, and I mixed in a lot of empty frames, and they're filling those up, and it's doing good. But I have frames that have honey on it, and my question is, some of those frames had sugar water and honey mixed together. Is that something? If you do draw that honey out, is it good honey or bad honey, or can you?
Basically, what I would do is I'd hold it up to a light if you're worried about that. Most of the time, your sugar water is going to be almost crystal clear. And if it's got an amber or a darker color to it, it's going to be honey. Most of the time, the bees is not going to mix it. They put it in separate areas.
Okay.
Now, a lot of times they'll use sugar water just to draw wax. I've seen that.
Yeah, I live on the edge of town, and I got all the city flowers, and
Your wife, your button, she mutes you on a regular basis off that.
You're gonna have to unmute yourself again.
High-tech stuff, I'll tell you, I can't manage it.
We'll come back to you, Steve. Pat, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I had a couple of things. Don briefly mentioned the summer solstice, and a lot of beekeepers don't really, they just listen to all the news and they don't understand how what goes on in the bee yard relates to winter solstice, summer solstice, that kind of thing. If you're not sure when that occurs, you can get a farmer's almanac. They sell them at Walmart or anywhere. A lot of the feed stores will give out a calendar every year that has all of that listed on it. The angle of the sun and the length of daylight triggers things that happen in the beehives. And so it becomes more important once you understand what time of year it is. If it's not warm enough and the days aren't long enough, it doesn't matter how many supers you're going to put on, the bees aren't going to go up there because they don't think it's time yet. And when it gets later into the summer, you're trying to do more things and the bees are already getting ready for winter because the angle of the sun has changed. The days are getting a little bit shorter. You may not have noticed it yet, but the bees already know. My angle changed about 2 weeks ago and my bees are already behaving differently. So those things become more important. One thing that we tried this year, because I keep my honey supers, and so, you know, Don's information is accurate, but I'm just hard-headed. I do some dumb things. I keep my honey supers and we store them. And this past year, Leon used Xentari, Xentari, and we really liked that. And it does not remain in the comb and it doesn't affect anything. But you do have to check your supers during the winter and make sure that the stuff hasn't worn off and the wax moths moved in. A friend of mine had his stored in this garage between the house and the garage. You know, it was an attached garage, and the wax moths got up in the wall and ate the 2x4s. So you have to be real careful.
The biggest problem is when you take them off from your spring flow, if you store them for a month or two.
Oh yeah, Leon says the biggest problem is if you take them off from the spring flow and try to store them for a month or two, if you're not accurate with what you're putting on or what you're doing, And if you put too many supers back on a too small of a hive, you're going to lose them. So you have to be real careful and watch what's going on. But the most important thing I can tell any of you is take notes. Date, time, weather, and what you found and what you did is the most important thing. About the third year, those notes are gold. You can go back and say, well, it's 80 degrees in February. I'm going to go open up my bees. You go look in them notes and say, don't do that, fool, because it's going to snow next week. And so they really start to pay off in a year's time when you can look back and say, oh, no, wait a minute. I lost bees because I did this, or, oh, this was great. Let's go ahead and do it. So those notes really pay off in the long run. And I think that's all for right now.
Okay, it looks like Steve's unmuted again. Steve?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Yep.
can hear you.
I had everything come up. My wife had to fix it. But yeah, I have just cotton and alfalfa just right out my door. I live on the edge of town, and they're really coming in. And I moved all my foundation or my bees up to my second. It's actually the 10-inch brooder that I put up on top so I can get them and move my brooder back down the fall. But yeah, I'm just getting honey bound, and I want to treat for mites. Do I have to pull those honey frames out, or I think I've seen something that you put up about not treating with the acid.
What are you going to treat with?
With the acid, the oxalic acid?
Oxalic acid?
Yeah.
We treat with the honey supers on, but I'm not in the business to sell honey, so I'm not really worried about it. I feed most of the honey that we make. I eat the honey that, I pulled off some privet, and I pulled 5 frames of medium off and got 6 quarts of honey from 5 frames of mediums. But we treat in the wintertime, we usually treat 2 to 3 times a month, and then we'll go to once a month during the summer. And then in the fall, we hit them again. But, I think it's the safest thing out there, and it's the thing that works. Now, there was a guy bought some queens from me a couple days ago, and he's still using Kumafos. And he was telling me how he don't do no treating. We got talking. He said, puts those white strips in. I said, you mean Kumafos? I said, now you contaminated all that wax. So I said, if you gave it to me, I don't want it because I try to keep my wax chemical free, and it's going to stay in there. I mean, you're going to have to treat bees some way, shape, or form. So you have to put it in your head. If you're worried about it, the best thing to do, I've seen people pull supers, but in a commercial operation, it's not basically feasible. When you run 100 hives to a location, run 10 locations, you're going to pull off 2 supers per hive and stack them somewhere. You'd have a major swarm going on, a robbing situation. So it's just like when you treat. I mean, you can treat with strips. You can treat with oxalic acid with the wand, which I think it's 100%. The drawback with that wand, I've done a video out here on it. It's going to burn your frames if you're not careful. It puts a scorch mark on it. It's 100% kill on it, but it's 2 to 3 minutes. So if you have 50 hives in a location, that takes some time. Now, if you buy that ProVap 110, it's really a good value. We're doing at least 2 hives per minute now, per minute, 60 seconds. Takes about 20 seconds to do a hive. Now I'm doing 5 frame nukes. I'm running a lot of them here. I do 4 or 5 frame nukes a minute. So I'm just putting partial, we load it up with the cap, and then I get 2 on a treatment. So it goes pretty fast. But, they have another thing out now. It's called that OA cannon, which is around $3,000. But, you can only put so much. If you've got 2 hives or 5 hives in your backyard, you can't afford to put out several $100s on treating. Or, you have to buy whatever's cheaper for you. You can break the mite cycle by doing splits. So, I mean, that's more organic way of doing things. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat out there.
Yeah,
I don't recommend doing the sugar dusting because it ends up causing more ants around your hives and everything else. And you're not doing nothing other than knocking them off and they'll climb right back in.
Yeah, I have dams for my, to prevent the ants from getting in it. They got so bad. And
Yeah.
I was going to do the vapor gun thing that you use.
Yeah.
Have the one hive. I can't split until next year because I'm in town. So I just want to try to get on the second hive built up, them her laying, and then put an excluder in it.
You can't split because of time or the season.
I'm in town. I have a backyard. It's just my one hive. So next year I'll be moving out to the country. Then I can split.
I would split now personally. Find a friend that's got some property out in the country. Wherever you go to church, there's got to be somebody there that's got some land. Let you put a few hives. You need to build your numbers now, because if you have one hive going into winter, you could have a loss on that one hive, and then you're starting over new again.
Yeah, I don't have a cold winter. We probably have 20 days of frost.
Mm-hmm.
It's not common in Central California.
It's not as much as the weather, it's other things. It's unpredictable. You're in an area where you could have bears getting there, and they like to knock things over. I've even had deers knock stands over. There's all kind of unpredictable things in the bee yard that happens.
Yeah, I'm right in the middle of Central Valley. We have no bears, we have skunks, nothing. We don't have freeze. We got the perfect weather. So yeah, I'll follow that advice.
And, cutting cells, Tom was here and watched how simple it is. I mean, you could stand a frame up. It's got 4 or 5 cells on it. And within seconds, you got 5, 6 splits right there. It's not hard. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, I enjoy your videos on that. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next up is Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, great. Hi, guys.
Hey.
A tactical question. When you do a split, how far away from the primary hive would you recommend placing that?
Well, if you've watched my videos, and Tom was here and Ernest is here, and they can tell you, I make splits right in front of them and move them back 5 foot.
Okay.
I'm not the big thing about 2 miles down the road and all that stuff. We make 25, 50 splits a day. So we move them 3 foot, 4 foot, wherever we have a spot to move them.
Well, I haven't actually done any splits here, but I had one I did yesterday, and the timing worked out well because the queen hatched one today or this morning. So I'm just waiting now. She'll have to go out and see if she gets fertilized. But generally speaking, I haven't done any splits up here in northern Maine because just the time, the time of the season. But this season's been a little bit different because it's been a late, sort of a later spring, and now everything is surprisingly almost honey bound. It's been a strong flow of.
How did your overwintering in the basement? You didn't give us a good update on.
That's the one I just did the split off of. That hive is very, very strong. Believe it or not, I got 3 deeps and 1 honey super on it. And I was going through it yesterday to get down into it, see how much honey they had, and then I came across 2 queen cells. So
with the 2 queen cells, you made just 1 split?
Yes, because the other one, as I removed it, the bugger, she got out and fled into the hive. So
well, if that happens, usually a new virgin queen like that, they're not going to kill them.
I found her today briefly at the top of the hive, right in the exit board area. Mm-hmm. And so before I could grab a cage, I wasn't expecting it. I was going back in just to double check on some things, and she disappeared. But she was up there by herself. That was kind of surprising. But the other queen hatched also, so she's got a couple frames with her brood and some nectar in that. I may put in a sugar board, a sugar feeder tomorrow.
One thing I would do, since you're up in extreme weather, is I would make very minimal splits, because when you have a queen like that hatching up and you made that big split, your queen has to fly out to mate, and if they don't return, you could lose a lot of bees.
That's true.
In your situation, I would do like a 2-frame split, and then let the field bees fly back. It's going to give some time for them other bees to mature a little bit, and then like in the situation you just had, if you could have put that other queen in there, you had 2 splits then, plus the original one.
Right.
That way, once they start laying, you can always cage her up. But
Sure.
now you said you was going to cage her. One word of advice most people don't understand is when that new queen comes out, if you try to pick her up, you can damage the wings very easy. They're soft, and you can damage where they won't fly out and mate.
Right, right. Good point. Yeah, no, it was just by luck of the draw. She when I carved out the queen cell there, I had it in my hand, and the cap opened up, and off she went into the hive.
Well, I mean,
she was a quick mover. What was amusing was the number of drones that were on top of that little queen cell.
When you hold that cell in your hand, you notice where it was starting to open up at the bottom?
It happened just after I cut it from the frame.
Oh, usually
yeah, so
you can see it.
I had her in my hand for a second. And she and I was, oh, okay, and then she was into the hive. It was that quick.
Well, I've had students out here and be picking up a young virgin queen, and they'll fly off. Oh, and I just tell them to close the hive up and move away. And a lot of times they come right back to that hive.
Right.
Not all the time, but a lot of times they will.
Mm-hmm. But back on that hive that made it through the winters, they're still very strong. I assume that I had to move out, adjust some around some of the frames and that, and put in some new foundation just to get rid of the nectar, that they are, stacking away, storing in the brood chamber area. So,
of all the ones you went through the winter with in the basement, did you lose any of them?
I lost 3 at the last week of April.
What do you think you lost them from? Nosema?
No. No Nosema. They actually were rather clever about that. They would kind of come out on the top of the hive and do their business on the top side of the hive outside.
Camouflage, huh?
Yeah. So no, it was basically a numbers game. Generally speaking, I was expecting by mid-April. That was my goal, to get them to mid-April, because normally mid-April we got the dandelions are coming out, but this spring lasted into early May. Mm-hmm. So we had a combination of there was the dearth of anything out there for them, and secondarily I think the hive numbers on at least 2 of them reached the point where they couldn't keep a warm enough cluster. Though I had the temperature probably around, I adjusted it to about around 45 at that time in March. In the end of towards the middle of April. So I think probably this next overwintering I'll just slightly upward the temperature as I assume that they're reducing in numbers. Probably in the 1st of March, I'll go from roughly 40 degrees up to maybe 48 or so, and take a little bit of the stress off them in terms of total numbers.
If you could run part of them at that temperature, then run part of them at a lot cooler temperature.
Yeah, I had very good luck running them at 39 from December through roughly end of March. They all had
suspended state and do better than if they're trying to be at 48, because my bees in the winter at 41 and 42, they're flying.
Yeah, I guess my thinking on that, Don, is that partly the other fault I had was I think I allowed them too much space in their hives. Mm-hmm. Okay, because I was a little bit worried. I went on a trip. Actually, I visited Anthony over in Thailand. I was a little bit worried in terms of how much feed they had in them, so I put an extra super on top of them. And I think that extra space actually worked as a detriment, because they, in terms of maintaining their temperature, their core temperature.
Probably, if you would have left this next winter now, if you get you a 2-inch shim board and put around there and put a fondant on there without that super, I think it probably, because I have learned by keeping them in a single and confining them down, in 5-frame nukes, they do a whole lot better than if they had a super of honey.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And then the other factor is I don't think I need to put a sugar board on them so early, because what happened is they move up, okay? And each of the hives that didn't make it had plenty of honey reserves, okay? And I use most of that up just feeding to the bees here in May, letting them rob it. But I decided I probably wouldn't put a sugar board on until maybe into February or so, because they move up to the top and then they leave all the other they'll work on the sugar board, but they'll just leave their own honey stalks alone. And so they're not dying for lack of food. That's one thing. There was no nosema issue. So it came down to basically probably a little bit of temperature, a little bit of numbers game in terms of how many were in the actual hive as they progressed through the into the spring. That's my gut sense. So I think maybe a little adjustments in temperature and timing of when I put a sugar board on there might help. Moisture was not an issue. I was able to regulate that pretty well.
If you have a truck, I could tell you the easiest way to solve that problem. You take them to Florida for the winter.
I know you mentioned that before. But I tell you, of all the people up here, that we had pretty harsh winter. Of course, we got some temperatures that go down to 40 below up here. Yeah. I don't know of anyone up here that had. Oh, there was one place maybe they had them in a barn that got their bees through the winter. And the ones that had them in the barn made a fatal error of it had windows in the barn. So the bees, sensing the sunlight, filled that entire barn. They were flying around like crazy.
I've talked to a fellow that used to run heat tape, and heat tape is used around pipes to keep it from freezing up north.
Right.
And, he had good luck. I've had people tell me about tar paper.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways. You just have to figure out what works for you in your area.
Yeah, I think the best thing up here is to give them a secure enough setting away from the high wind, the wind velocity, which can go up to 30, 40 miles per hour, plus be 30 below at times. And it's just too much of a stress on their ability to maintain the cluster. Then you get the oddball days where in February you might have a day goes up to 70, they'll break cluster, and the next day it goes down to 20 below, and they get a freezing issue or a moisture issue inside. Right. So you get those extremes. But I was quite pleasantly surprised, though, actually, that I got them all through it to the last week in April. So that's 5 months in a controlled environment.
Well, you just have to tweak it out, and probably next year you have better,
Yeah, and they were all treated for mites and all that stuff before I put them in and all that. Anyway, so there should not have been a mite issue in that sense.
What did you treat with?
Oxalic acid, the vaporizer system.
Yeah.
And like you said, I had one scorch board, but that was it. It wasn't that bad. But
once you get your numbers up, you probably tried out Anthony's Provap down there or watched him work it.
I've watched that. I saw him using that. Yeah.
But you have to have enough hives to justify it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if they had a reasonable, I would suppose, bee club up here, that might be an item that might be of use to use in a general community sense. Though you'll for somebody with 5 to 10 hives, but if you had maybe 20 bee club members who had in the total 100 hives or more, that might be a useful item for everybody to pitch in on as a community item.
Well, the one thing to look at is time, and then versus the success of it. That's the thing. Sure. Now, Larry will probably give you a discount. I know a lot of students that I have has called him and talked to Larry, and Larry's given them a little discount. So, even if you went went through a bee club and got a larger order,
right?
Tell him, that I talked to you. You've seen it on my page and he's been kind of helping out on a lot of my students.
Right. No, I've heard you mention that before.
Yeah.
Okay, number of hands up here. We're going to move on to Anthony. Go ahead, Anthony.
Okay, hello everyone. Like Pat said, that B401, Surtan, Zentari, it's all the same product. And it really does work. If for any reason you have a problem with wax moths, or for whatever reason you want to store frames, you don't have room in the freezer. I've said this before, you know, my biggest problem is wax moth here. We don't have small hive beetles. They're not in Thailand. And I had a bait box out here for 3 months. And when I first put it out there last year, exactly what Dawn said, within 2 weeks, I took a look in there and the frames were all full of tunnels, webbing. They were all shitted up. They were done. But I put this B401 Surtan on there, and it comes in a concentrate, and then you mix it and spray it. And that thing was out there for 3 months. And sometimes I'd look in there just to see what was going on. And I'd see a wax moth in there, an adult wax moth, but never any larvae, no webbing, no tunneling, no nothing. So it's B401 CERTAN or XENTARI. It's all the same product. And Pat and I both had good performance with it. Summer solstice, winter solstice is always on June 21st, December 21st, or 22nd. It only changes like one day once in a while. For the last 10 years, the winter solstice is December 21, December 21st. It's very easy. Just look on the internet for a solstice schedule, pops right up. It'll give you a 10-year window of when the winter and summer solstice is, whether it's on the 21st or the 22nd. And a week ago Saturday, I went to a bee seminar here, and it was about Apis cerana, the Asian Apis bee, and Apis melipona, the stingless bee. So I talked to the couple of people at the university in entomology, so they said, if you want to come to this, you can come, but it's all in Thai. So I just brought my wife with me, and we only stayed for half of it because it was pretty basic, and a lot of this stuff I already knew from reading about them. But we're going to this thing, and we're driving up to the top of a mountain, and it's barely a lane and a half wide, vertical switchbacks. I had to put my car in low to get up there, and I'm saying to my wife, where the hell are we going? Why the hell are they having a bee thing up here on the top of this damn mountain? We had it at a Buddhist temple up there, and then I figured out why we had it up there, because what this was about was there's coffee plantations up there. I didn't realize they were that close to me. I thought they were closer to Burma, but these were a bunch of coffee farmers came there, and most of them run Apis cerana, and they only really get one flow a year. You get a flow for like the coffee flowers of the whole month of May, and tasted some. Do you ever taste coffee honey? Anybody ever taste coffee honey? It's pretty dark and it's pretty strong, but I liked it. I mean, I liked it, but it was definitely a unique, strong flavor. But it was okay. But other than that, I'm in feeding time. I'll be feeding for the next probably 6 months. So ain't nothing going on here but feed, and feed. So that's all I got. We got a lot of hands up, so go ahead and take the next one. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on what Pat was saying before about storing honey supers, because I don't want to cut the wax out. I want to reuse my frames. But I was just wondering, to prevent the wax moth, being that I have the cold winters up here, can I store those supers outside, let them freeze for a couple of days, and then move them into my basement? Do I still got to worry about wax moth?
They will get them.
Oh, they'll even move inside then, huh?
Yep. And you don't want that.
Yeah. I
You'll
know.
have holes through your 2x4s. You'll have them coming out of the ceiling.
And now the paramoth crystals, that doesn't leave a residue on the wax?
Anything you put in a beehive is going to leave some kind of residue. So the least amount of things you put in there.
Cat's got something to say here.
Got her all excited.
What do you have, Cat?
Okay, my husband Leon is a retired chemist, and so I'm giving you accurate information. The chemical that you need to look for is para-dichlorobenzene, old-fashioned moth crystals from Roses, Walmart, wherever you can get it, not mothballs, because those are naphthalene, and naphthalene is deadly. But the para-dichlorobenzene does not remain in the wax. I take them out and I have to, I cross stack the honey supers so there's lots of airflow, and I air them out until there's no fume, no smell, and put them right on with no problem. And I use them, I've been using them for years. Now, every other year, I'll take that and replace it. I don't have a wax super that's 20 years old. I'll store it a winter and then use it again, and I'm always rotating it out. But para-dichlorobenzene does not remain in the wax, and it does no harm, but it will prevent the wax moth and the little larva from burrowing into the wood and damaging everything. But you have to do something, because the cold temperature would freeze them and kill what was there. But if you had a warm spell, you'd lose everything before you even knew it. And so what we do is we'll put 2 supers in a garbage bag and a coffee filter on top, and about 2 tablespoons. Well, Leon says one because he does it. 1 tablespoon of the para-dichlorobenzene in the coffee filter, and tie up the garbage bag. It's heavier than air, so as it dissipates, it sinks down over the honey supers and it'll cover 2 to 3, depending on how many you can get in your garbage bag. We do 2 per bag, and it works well. I've used it for years, for 12 years. I never lost hives, so I know it works.
Now, the wax moth itself, in comparison to a honeybee, how big is it? I've never even seen a wax moth.
They look like little moths you see around your lights at night, but they've even shown where they've cut the egg sac off of them, and the things come out of it and find the wood. So the moth doesn't have to necessarily burrow in for them. They're very destructive and very determined. So it's one of those pests that we have. But that's all. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wave and flap. Sorry about that.
Well, Anthony's waving now. I think he's got something.
Yeah. Paul, the ones they have greater wax moth and lesser wax moth. You should just Google it and take you like 10 minutes. You can read about it and you can see. Now, the ones I get here, they're maybe like a 1/2 inch long, and they're like a yellowish tan. Those are the ones that I get here. And Pat's not having a problem because she's got the parachlorodibenzene in there. But you can't put them in a plastic bag and think you're going to be okay, because when you read about wax moth, you're going to see that they actually will eat plastic. They eat plastic. So can't put them in a plastic bag without any kind of treatment in there, right?
I was reading something about that the some garbage facilities were thinking of actually raising wax moth to consume the plastic.
Yeah, so that's why you can't put them in. I just didn't want you to fall into the trap of putting them in a trash bag. And I mentioned before, I brought in a box with 8 or 10 frames in it, and I put it in my spare bedroom. They even got in my house in the spare bedroom. And when I went back and looked in there, what a mess. Jesus, what a mess it makes. So, yeah, you got to do something. All right.
Well, last year I didn't have a problem because I didn't have too many supers, and I stored them. I put them in my chest freezer. But this year I'm talking, I got 20, 25 supers. So I'm going to have to do something different.
If you pull honey, be sure to extract it within 2 days, because 3 or 4 days, you're going to have small hive beetles in it, and it won't be fit to eat. The bees won't even eat it.
Yeah.
So most people have never extracted, or it's going into their first year or even the second year, and they work a lot. So they pull their boxes or their honey supers off and then have them stacked up in their garage covered with plastic. And they go back 4 days later and it's all running out the bottom like soup.
Yeah.
So something to think about. Extract it the day you pull them out. Be safe.
And one other thing, if you do buy a bottle of B401, the bottle, it's like about this big, that treats 120 frames. And then you can buy a bigger bottle, and Zentari, I think, comes in a bag, and you mix it. So, okay, go ahead, because you got some hands up there, and we're getting towards the end. So let these other people ask. Go ahead.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Next up is Dale. Go ahead, Dale.
He must be muted.
Yeah, I'm unable to unmute him. You're going to have to unmute yourself if you can.
There we go.
There you go.
Don, you said about the watch for the swarms now. You know, I've been going through my hives. I see very few drone cells. Do they create drones like they do in the spring?
Most of the time they do, but nothing is set in stone in beekeeping. I've seen swarms that would just because we're crowded and just have maybe a couple dozen drone cells off to the side.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, next up is Pat.
Yeah, I wanted to talk for a second. The guy that's putting his in the basement, and I'm sorry guys, I forget your names and I can't keep you straight. I'm taking notes, but the names sometimes I miss. One of the things that has been become apparent to me this year is I have never in 12 years of beekeeping used chemical treatments of any kind in my beehives for wax moths or anything inside the hives. I've never used oxalic acid. I've never used chemicals. But this year in October, I am going to treat my bees, cross your fingers guys, because I'm really nervous, but Leon says we are, for mites with oxalic acid, because there's a guy, Dr. Samuel Ramsey, he did his doctoral thesis on the mites and what they feed on. And up until this point, nobody was really 100% sure. He dyed their fat and dyed their honey and dyed all the different parts and watched what they fed. And his whole research was to prove what the honeybees feed on. They feed on the fat layer on the honeybee, the mites do. They go on, they burrow between the plates and they feed on the fat. And the reason it's important to treat in October is the bees that are born in October and November live all winter because they don't have to work. They don't harvest nectar. They're in the hive being lazy and they live longer. And so that fat layer is what gets them through the winter. And he said that the reason people are experiencing such losses in March and April is by the time the bees get to that point, they don't have any more fat reserves and they don't starve because there's still plenty of food. They starve because their body no longer has any fat reserves and they can't replace them. That their biology, they're already too old to heal themselves, let's call it that. And so this October, I'm going to treat with oxalic acid to get rid of the mites going into winter. And so it's something to consider for the guy that had his bees in the basement. It's not just go out there and, oh, I'm going to treat them today and put them in the basement. You have to figure out when your bees are going to be emerging that are going to be your winter bees. It's a little bit different by location. You may be a little bit earlier than mine are. So you may want to treat the end of September. And so treat them with the intentions of getting rid of the mites to get your bees fat and healthy, your winter bees fat and healthy going into the winter. They're still going to need the food that you're going to provide for them, but they will be able to consume it and survive that early spring, which those bees get the queen going and get the hive going back to start back up in spring. So it's something to consider. And the other thing was, back to the honey supers real quick, I'm sorry. We put 2 supers in a garbage bag, put a coffee filter on top, put a tablespoon, and we go every month and check and replace as needed throughout the winter. So that you have to maintain it. Like he said, you can't just toss them in a garbage, plastic bag and hope for the best. You got to watch them. Read the instructions on any chemicals that you use, because a lot of people think, oh, well, it says a tablespoon. Well, hey, half a cup's better, or I'll just shake some in, it'll be good enough, and I'll come back in April. So be careful with your instructions on any chemicals that you use. And make sure if you're using oxalic acid that you're using a respirator. And a lot of guys laugh that off and think, I'm only here for a minute, I'm not going to harm anything. It's too late once you've damaged your lungs. So be real careful with those chemicals. That's it.
You see, I wore one when I did my video.
Yep.
But I don't have mites in my lungs.
Okay, next up is Chris. Go ahead. Chris?
Yeah, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, new guy, sorry. Hi, Don, how's it going?
Okay.
Hey, thanks for everything you're doing for the beekeeping. I appreciate that.
Well, I try to help everybody I can, even though I bore a lot of people.
Well, so I've watched a lot of the past chats on YouTube. My first question is, when you condense bees down to get them to make swarm cells, are you going to lose the original queen? Is she
Not
going to
necessarily. The only reason you would lose an original queen is mishandling a hive or rolling them up between frames. I'm not a big person as far as 10 frame stuff. Put 9 frames in there. If you got a 10 frame box, put 10 frames in. If you got an 8 frame, use 8. And always learn to work the outside frame and then set that to the outside where you have room to work. Right. Never pull a frame from the middle, because you can roll a queen, and then right now, I can tell when people are working their hives, the phone don't stop ringing, and right away everybody wants queens. They're rolling the queens up, they're damaging them.
Okay, so she's not gonna, as long as you cut the queen cells out and use those for splits, will you keep the original queen, or is she gonna swarm?
No, why would she swarm?
Well, isn't that the whole purpose when they make queen cells, that the original queen leaves?
No. If you listen to a lot of my videos, bees do 2 things. They multiply and they store honey. Once they get crowded, they make cells. That doesn't mean the queen's failing, or maybe you bumped her. No, they make it that way. But it's a natural process. They need more room. If you're not watching your beehive, they get honey bound. They get crowded, they're going to make cells. That doesn't mean there's a thing wrong with the queen.
Okay. I just, in my mind, I thought that was the whole process. They made swarm cells. The original queen would leave.
Queen,
as long as you're taking the...
She'll do her best the second year. Sometimes second and third year queens really will perform well.
Okay.
It's beekeeping, people get in there and they wear gloves and they wear a veil and not watching what they do, and they're rolling queens, or they're bumping them, or they're mishandling them.
Okay. I guess I just was under the impression you'd always lose that first queen due to swarm cells. So that's good to know. One other quick thing. I get an abundance of pollen, and they store a lot, and I can't ever get them to reuse it. So I end up melting it out of the wax and disposing of it. But I don't know. I can't get them to reuse it. I do give it to them in the spring, but I've always got more than I can stand. Is that something you see, or?
No, well, some years, this year has been a rainy year, so we don't see an abundance of pollen. But in last year, we had a few hives that had solid frames of pollen. We'll use that frame, pull it out, and make a split with it, because bees are constantly replacing the pollen. And if you have way too much pollen in a hive, then you have your chance of your hive beetles really multiplying, because if you keep more of the pollen pulled out, because it's basically fermenting there. It's yeasty, and that's what the beetles, they'll feed on it. Once they get in it, it's hard to get them out.
Right, and there's no good way to save that for the following year?
It's going to mold on you, basically, what it's going to do.
So it just melted out like I've been doing, and because they continually bring it back.
if you had enough freezers, and I mean enough freezers to freeze several thousand frames, if you want to save it, you probably could save it that way.
Right.
If you kept it in the freezer, then put it in the springtime, they'll probably use it to build brood up. But if it starts to get mildew or mold on there, they're not going to use it.
Right. Okay. That's all for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Ricky.
Yeah, g'day. I've got one hive where the brood is all on the front, on the frames in the front half of the hive, and the honey is all on the other half of the frame. So, I'm just wondering, does that sort of point to a problem where they're all like where there's no like honey band at the top? It's just on the back end of the frame. So,
a lot of times if you're, I don't know how you position your frames, but here, the side on the western side of the hive is where you're going to have your brood. So if you got a lot of brood on the front side, it's probably facing the hot side of the day. That's what they want. Then most of the warm on the hive, to warm it up, to keep the brood warm, get them early start.
Yeah, it's on the southwest, so yeah.
Well, you can rotate your hive a little bit and they'll probably spread it out, but normally one side of a hive will have more honey on it than the other, and they'll have pollen and brood on the other side.
Okay, that's interesting. I just thought it seemed like the Italian ones, queens tend to do that more than the other ones. So it was just, but if I want to, as we get close to spring and the bees start getting a lot more active, should I just sort of start moving some of those frames up into the top box and
you can checkerboard 2 or 3 at a time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do too many at one time until you get a feel for that checkerboarding, because if you go overboard, you separate your brood, and then if you get a cold spell, you're going to get chill brood.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I just don't want them to get honey bound because there seems to be it's middle of winter and we've still got honey coming out, honey fly coming in. So
the best thing to do if you got a number of hives is just go to the back of the hive and lift the back up about 1 inch off the stand. Or you could go to one side, lift it up, and go to the other side of the same hive. The side that's heaviest is going to be the side where all your honey's stored at. If it feels like you can't move it, then get in the hive and pull the frame out, extract it, or put it up above, and extract it out later. But you got to have enough room in that brood chamber for them to keep, maintaining populations.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, and last questions, Anthony. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, so just be quick. Pat was saying when your winter bees get old, they get up into March and April, and then they're too old to make fat. I want to know how the hell they do that. Because I put on about 40 pounds in the last 6 months. I need some help. They might be on to something. We need to find out how they do that. And I'll leave you with that. Bye-bye, everybody. I got to go.
Okay.
Take care. Bye now. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everybody showing up, and thanks, Tom, for hosting tonight. And we'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
Okay, take care.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks.